I woke up in a private hospital suite with no memory of how I got there, just the steady beep of a monitor and an IV taped to the back of my hand. The door was half shut, and through the gap I could hear my mother-in-law's voice, low and pleased with itself. "Did the lawyer confirm the new trustee paperwork?" My husband's sister answered her, almost giddy. "By Monday the foundation's accounts are fully under our name. She'll be too rattled to even ask questions." My pulse should have spiked. Instead, something in me went very calm. I reached for my phone on the side table and typed one sentence to my attorney: "Move forward with everything we discussed. My name is Claire, I'm 31, and 3 years ago I built a wellness logistics company out of a spare bedroom in Austin, Texas. A platform that helps small clinics manage supply chains for medical equipment." It sounds unglamorous until you understand what it actually became. A 7-figure business that I grew without a single dollar of family money, while my husband Brian's family treated me like an accessory that had wandered too far above her station. I hadn't grown up the way they had. No country club memberships, no boarding school, no trust fund waiting at 25. My mother cleaned houses in Round Rock for 22 years. And I put myself through community college working night shifts at a pharmacy, counting pills and reading every label twice, because I couldn't afford to make a mistake that cost someone their job. By the time I met Brian at a logistics conference in Dallas, I already had 2 patents pending and a 6-person team. He liked that about me, or so he said. His mother, Eleanor, never did. Eleanor ran the family's foundation, the Whitfield Family Trust, a charitable nonprofit her late husband had built around hospital donations, with the kind of icy precision that made every room go quiet when she entered it. Her daughter, my sister-in-law Margot, sat on the board too, more for the title than the work. From the very first dinner, Eleanor made it clear she thought I'd married up, that my company was a hobby that happened to make money, and that the only reason Brian hadn't come to his senses yet was infatuation. She said things like that to my face, smiling the kind of cruelty that wears pearls. What none of them knew was that 18 months earlier my company had quietly become the largest vendor contract for the Whitfield Family Trust's medical equipment program. I didn't run that part of the business myself. My operations director did, and out of professional caution, I'd kept my name off the public-facing paperwork to avoid any appearance of favoritism. Eleanor had spent over a year praising the efficiency of this new vendor without realizing she was praising me. The dinner that landed me in the hospital happened on a Thursday in late spring, hosted at Eleanor's house outside the city, supposedly to celebrate the foundation's annual gala planning. I'd had 1 glass of wine, the same bottle everyone else was drinking from, except mine had been poured separately in the kitchen by Margot, who insisted on helping the caterer that night. 20 minutes after that toast, the room tilted sideways, and the last clear thing I remember is Brian's voice asking if I was okay, and Eleanor's hand on my shoulder, soft and reassuring, the way you'd touch someone you were about to discard. In the ambulance, I was conscious enough to hear 2 paramedics discussing low blood pressure and an unusual sedative reading in my system, words I held onto and repeated silently until I had them memorized. I didn't say anything to Brian about it that night. I needed to know if he was part of it before I let him know I suspected anything at all. Lying in that hospital bed, listening to Eleanor and Margot through the gap in the door, I understood exactly what they were doing. With me sedated and unstable, Eleanor planned to push through an emergency board resolution removing me from my advisory seat on the foundation, citing concerns about my mental fitness and erratic behavior, a seat I held not as charity but because I was, on paper, the primary vendor contact and a major donor in my own right, contributing nearly $400,000 over 2 years, through both company sponsorship and personal gifts. If they succeeded, they wouldn't just remove me. They'd quietly redirect future vendor contracts to a company Margot's husband had just registered 3 weeks earlier, cutting my business out entirely and funneling the foundation's purchasing power into their own pocket. It was almost elegant, in a sociopathic way. Drug the daughter-in-law, call it a breakdown, push the paperwork through while she's too disoriented to object, and by the time she's clear-headed again, it's done. The kind of plan that works perfectly on someone who doesn't already have a forensic accountant and a malpractice attorney on retainer. I'd hired both 8 months earlier, not because I suspected this exact scheme, but because Eleanor's efficiency reviews of the vendor contracts had started feeling less like oversight and more like someone building a paper trail to justify pushing my company out. I'd learned the hard way, building a business from nothing, that you document everything before you ever need to, because by the time you need it, it's too late to start. I texted my attorney, Patricia Quinn, from that hospital bed, 4 words that meant more than they looked like they should. Move forward with everything we discussed. She'd been ready for this for months. We'd built a file labeled Whitfield Contingency that included every email where Eleanor pressured my ops team for kickback-adjacent consulting fees, every recorded board meeting where she questioned my fitness without cause, and the registration documents for Margot's husband's shell company, which my accountant had flagged the week it was filed because it shared an EIN registration agent with 3 other entities Eleanor had used before. The nurse came in around midnight, checked my vitals, and mentioned almost offhand that my toxicology panel showed elevated levels of a benzodiazepine I had never been prescribed. I asked her to note it formally in my chart and to save a copy for me. She did without asking why, the way nurses do when they've seen enough family drama in hospital hallways to know not to ask. Brian showed up the next morning, hollow-eyed, having apparently spent the night convincing himself I'd simply had a panic attack. I watched him carefully while I told him I felt fine, just tired, and I let him hold my hand while internally I catalogued every flicker of guilt or knowledge that crossed his face. There wasn't much. He seemed genuinely shaken, genuinely confused, which told me he likely hadn't been. Eleanor was many things, but she wasn't foolish enough to trust her son with a plan that required his wife to be incapacitated. Still, I said nothing, not yet. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 10 days after the dinner, conveniently while I was still recovering. Eleanor sent the notice through the Foundation's general counsel, citing concerns regarding board member capacity, language so clinical it could have applied to anyone, vague enough to survive scrutiny, specific enough to do exactly what she needed it to do. I let her believe it was working. For 10 days I stayed quiet, skipped 2 scheduled calls, let Margot's emails about taking some time to rest go unanswered, and let Eleanor's flowers, sent with a card reading "Wishing you a swift and full recovery," sit on my kitchen counter like the small monument to hypocrisy they were. Meanwhile, Patricia filed 3 things on my behalf. A formal request for an independent forensic audit of the Foundation's vendor contracts going back 2 years, a notice of intent to pursue civil action regarding tampered consumables at a private event, and the one that actually mattered, a motion with the Foundation's Bylaws Committee arguing that any vote to remove a sitting board member required 72 hours written notice to all parties, including the member in question, something Eleanor's rushed timeline had conveniently skipped. Tuesday morning I walked into the Whitfield Foundation's boardroom in a navy suit instead of a hospital gown, my heels striking the marble floor with a sound that made 3 board members visibly startle. Eleanor's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It actually moved, a flicker of real surprise before the composure slammed back into place. "Claire," she said, "you really shouldn't have come. You're still recovering." "I'm fully recovered," I said, taking my seat at the table. "Thank you for asking." I set a manila folder down in front of me, the kind of deliberate, unhurried motion that says I am not afraid of you, and I have all day. The board chair, an older man named Walter Higgins, who'd known Brian's late father and had no particular loyalty to Eleanor, opened the floor for the proposed vote on board capacity. I asked, politely, whether the 72-hour notice requirement under Article 6 of the bylaws had been satisfied. It hadn't. Eleanor's general counsel tried to argue the requirement could be waived by majority vote in cases of urgency, and I asked, just as politely, what exactly constituted the urgency. Given that I had been cleared by my treating physician 4 days prior and had documentation to that effect, which I then placed on the table, Eleanor's lawyer started to recover his footing, suggesting the board move forward regardless, citing ongoing concerns about my judgment. That's when I opened the folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I laid out the toxicology report from the hospital, the nurse's notation, and the timeline cross-referenced against the dinner Eleanor herself had hosted. I laid out the vendor contract documents showing my company's 2-year relationship with the foundation, which Eleanor had praised in writing on at least 6 occasions, without knowing whose company she was praising. And I laid out the registration filing for Margot's husband's new company, dated 3 weeks before the dinner, alongside an email from Margot to the foundation's purchasing manager asking, quote, how soon contracts could be reassigned if circumstances changed. The room went very still. Walter Higgins read through the toxicology report twice before looking up at Eleanor, with an expression I can only describe as the death of a friendship. Margot's face had gone the particular shade of pale that comes right before someone starts talking too fast to explain themselves out of something they clearly can't explain. I didn't ask the board to remove Eleanor. I let the documents speak, and I let the silence stretch long enough that everyone in that room understood exactly what they were looking at. Then I said the only thing I'd planned to say from the start. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I built something real, and I'm not going to let anyone take it from me by pretending I'm unwell. The independent audit Patricia filed will confirm everything in this folder within 30 days. I'd suggest the board wait for those results before voting on anything. They did. The audit confirmed all of it. Eleanor resigned from the foundation's board 6 weeks later, quietly, in a statement that used the word transition 4 times and the word wrongdoing 0 times, which told you everything about the kind of woman she still was, even in defeat. Margot's husband's shell company was dissolved before it ever signed a single contract. The district attorney's office reviewed the toxicology findings, but ultimately declined to pursue criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence to prove intent beyond reasonable doubt. A frustrating, familiar kind of injustice, but not one that surprised me. Some wars you win in the boardroom because the courtroom was never going to give you what you needed fast enough. Brian and I separated 4 months later, not because he was complicit, but because I realized I'd spent 3 years married into a family that saw me as a threat to manage rather than a person to know. And he'd spent 3 years either unwilling or unable to see it. He didn't fight the divorce. I think some small part of him was relieved to be free of his mother's gravity too. I kept my company. I kept the foundation's vendor contract, awarded fairly this time through a competitive bid process I insisted on personally overseeing. And I kept the manila folder, tucked in a drawer in my office, not because I need it anymore, but because it reminds me of something I want to tell anyone who's ever been underestimated by people who confuse their inheritance for character. You don't have to raise your voice to win. You just have to make sure that when they finally try to take what's yours, you're the only one in the room holding the proof.